my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers, never lived like a hog. Me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog. This is for my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers, never lived like a hog. Me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog. I raise this glass for the ones who died meaninglessly and the newborns who get fed intravenously. Somebody's mama caught a job and a welfare fraud case. When she breathes, she swear it feel like plastic wrap around her face. Lights turned off. This is the 3rd month the rent is late. Thoughts of being homeless, crying till you hyperventilate. Despair permeates the air and sets in her head. The kids play with that one toy they learned how to share. Coming home don't ever seem to be a celebration. Bills they piled up on the coffee table like they decoration. Heaping spoons of peanut butter, big ass glass of water. Make the hunger subside. Save the real food for your daughter. You feel like swinging haymakers at a moving truck. You feel like laughing so it seems like you don't give a fuck. You feel like getting so high you smoke the whole damn crop. You feel like crying, but you think that you might never stop. Homes with no heat stiffen your joints like arthritis. If this was fiction, it'd be easier to write this. Some folks try to front like they so above you. They tear this motherfucker up if they really loved you. This is for my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers, never lived like a hog. Me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog. There's certain tricks of the trade to try to halt your defeat. Like taking Tupperware to an all-you-can-eat. Returning used shit for new, saying you lost your receipt. And writing 4-figure checks when your accounts deplete. Then all your problems pile up about a mile up. Thinking about a partner you could dial up to help you out this vile stuff. Whole family sleeping on a futon while you clipping coupons, eating salad, trying to get full off the croutons. Cross-town, the situation is identical. Somebody getting strangled by the system and its tentacles. Misconceptions raise questions to be solved. A lot of dope boys is broke. A lot of homeless got jobs. You could make 8 bones an hour till you pass out and still be ass out. Most pyramid schemes don't let you cash out. They say this generation made the harmony break. But crime rise consistent with the poverty rate. You take the workers from jobs, you gon' have murders and mobs. A gang of preachers screaming sermons over murmurs and sobs, saying, pray for a change from the Lord above you. They tear this motherfucker up if they really loved you. This is for my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers who got billed, never lived like a hog. Me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog. You like this song because it's relatable. It's you in the rhyme. We go to stores that only let us in 2 at a time. We live in places where it costs to get your check cash. Arguments about money usually drown out the tech blast. Work 6 days a week, can't sleep Saturdays though. Muscles trembling like a pager when the battery's low. And you still don't know where the years went. Although every single shift feel like a year spent. You could write your resume, but it wouldn't even mention all the life lessons learned during 6 years of detention. And how you learn the police was just some handicappers on the ground next to broken glass and candy wrappers. So don't accept my collects on the phone, just hit me back at the house so I know I ain't alone. And we could chop it up about this messed up system. Homies that's been killed, how we always gonna miss them. It's almost impossible surviving on this fraction. It's a perforate to the brain for the chemical reaction. You gotta hustle, cause they're trying to push and shove you. I tear this motherfucker up, since I really love you. This is for my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers, never lived like a hog. Me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog. All right, speaking to a room full of people coming together at a conference called Marxism 2014, probably a lot of the ideas I said in that song and will say in this speech aren't new ideas. I'm not here to really reinvent the wheel, because we still have the same system that we've had before, and a lot of the same answers apply. But what I may have is a different way of looking at those same answers and those same problems that maybe spark some ideas. As we all know, the primary contradiction in capitalism is exploitation. It's at the labor point. It's on the job. For some reason, especially in the United States, radicals have left that issue alone. Right? We've left it to the progressives and the liberals, and and there's a history to that, at least in the United States, and there's probably a few parallels to what's happened here. When I was in college, we couldn't have a political argument with each other without proving it by saying, well, what they did in the 60s was, because we all looked to the 60s. We saw it on TV. We saw movies made about what happened in the 60s. And the 60s was, to us, this time when you could just yell out your window and say there's going to be a rally in an hour, and thousands of people would show up and, and shut down the student union or whatever. And we looked at that as the heyday, as the time we should strive to recreate, right? And in fact, though, as I got older and learned a little bit more, I realized that that period of time, while it did have some developments, was all in all a retreat in the United States for revolutionaries organizing the working class. And it affects, that retreat affects us today. It affects the style of how we organize. It affects the campaigns that we choose. In the United States in the 20s and 30s, places that now are considered to be the reactionary geographical areas, Montana, Utah, Colorado, Alabama, Michigan. Those places were called by J. Edgar Hoover in the 20s hotbeds of communist activity. So what's now red states, which is what we refer to as the states that the Republicans control, were really red states. The grandparents of the people that we consider to be the right-wing base were radicals. Now, what happened during the time, and not only during the 20s did we have, and why did they say it was a hotbed of communist activity? There were mining strikes going on all over those places. Mining struggles that developed into sometimes bloody fights, but at various levels were very militant and very openly part of a revolutionary movement. You had places like Alabama where people fought back against the mining companies with guns when they sent in the Pinkerton security. You had, and by the way, that's like some of the beginnings, some of the cultivation of the gun culture that we now see as right-wing. The right-wing American gun culture actually has radical roots, and and it's very surprising to some. But so we had that going on, and across the Midwest, you had workers occupying factories, taking them over and demanding higher wages. Many of you know a lot of this stuff, but I'm just setting this picture up. You also had, at the time, about 1 million card-carrying members of the Communist Party. You had, during that same era, you had a bonus march, which was veterans of World War I who weren't getting paid enough, who weren't getting their benefits, and wanted some change in that, who marched demanding their money to the White House in the hundreds of thousands, and some of them carrying guns. This was met by tanks and a battle with General McCarthy and his troops. At the same time, obviously, there were revolutions happening all over the world. So in this period of time, and as a response to this, we had what we call the New Deal policies. Social Security, welfare, the very little Medicare we got came during that time. Food stamps, things like that came in the midst of all that. In school, we were taught that this was done by the good, gracious heart of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who just had a plan. But in reality, these came out of fear of revolution, fear of a revolutionary movement that was very strong. That had its was spreading out all over the place. And we say 1 million communists at a time when the population was only 127 million in the United States. And the effect of it and the militancy that went along with that movement was spread out to even farther than that. And again, to just build this story, and I'm painting with broad strokes, and I'm not a professor or anything. I'm just giving you the idea, what's forming my ideas right now. So I'm not going to be really detailed. But during the World War II, the Communist Party of the U.S. decided, hey, we need fascism beat. So out of the idea of the United Front Against Fascism, the communists in the U.S. stopped challenging the system, and in many ways, obviously they didn't stop, but this started with this started certain policies that developed into people organizing in a less outward way. So you could have someone organizing in a union that was a communist and be the leader that was leading certain militant strikes. And again, there's other things going on at the same time, but that wasn't out about themselves being communists. So this led to a time in the 50s where it was much easier to then have a witch hunt and talk about communists who had been hiding themselves. That there was this general tactic that was less outward than it had been 20 years before. And that tactic was able to be pounced upon. And we had the McCarthy era and the House Un-American Activities Committee, which, by the way, was only able to be stopped when the House Un-American Activities Committee was a committee that went around and asked people if they were communists, and if they dared to say yes, they'd be on blacklists and wouldn't be able to get a job. However, and it went on, and people lied and pled the fifth, and it ruined people's financial lives in many cases. But the only way it stopped was once it got to San Francisco, a crowd of people came in and said, "Fuck you, I'm a communist." And the House Un-American Activities Committee realized this was not worth it because it could make it become popular. And that was what stopped it, was people saying, "Yeah, fuck you, yes, I'm a communist." And it wasn't going to be able to work anymore. Well, during that time, because of McCarthyism and and problems around discoveries about things that Stalin had done, there was splits. Out of those new splits came organizations that, a lot of them are the ones that we consider the new left of the 60s in the United States. Along with that new left came a new idea about how to organize, right? A new idea about how to organize. Many radicals had, again, been chased out of the existing unions. And not only was this bad for radicals, this was bad for the unions, because the unions then had no teeth. The only ones that had the most militant union that still exists in the United States is the ILWU, the Longshoremen on the West Coast. And they are militant because they are the only ones that said, "We don't care if you're a communist, we just want you to fight." And they didn't purge communists from their organizations, and to this day, they're the ones that strike the most. And although it still has the trade unionist sort of attitude for the most part, you know, folks that were at the bottom of the at the bottom of the pay scale are now like the best paid blue collar workers in the United States, making $110,000 a year because they'll shut down the port at the drop of a dime. Right? They've also done some solidarity, some symbolic solidarity strikes. They shut the ports down for Nelson Mandela. They shut the ports down for Mumia. They shut the ports down in honor of Oscar Grant, who was killed by the police. These are symbolic moves, but not part of a larger strategic thing. So the New Left of the 60s had a lot of ideas about how to organize in a new way. One of those ideas was focusing on students. And at the same time, we saw a shift away from organizing around labor issues. So the folks that had 30 years before that been in areas that were hotbeds of communist activity around working class issues were now left alone to, at best, be organized by liberals, and most often organized by very reactionary forces. So, though, you know, you talk, when we talk even with my band about going and playing in Montana, there's this idea about the attitudes out there that you don't want to go through. You don't want to go through Alabama. You don't want to go through Utah. You don't, and there's truth to a lot of those ideas. There was probably racism that existed there definitely was racism that existed at the time when these were hotbeds of communist activity, because there's uneven development, and that's how it works. And those ideas still exist, but we forget about the other ideas that exist with a lot of those folks. So the New Left, focusing more on students, focusing on other issues that were always focused on before, but I mean, were always worked on before, but didn't have the front and center part of the struggle. And a lot of the style that developed was based a lot on spectacle. Let's get a group of people together so that people notice when they see that group of people. And which is much different than organizing around your base of economic power. And started a trend of organizing without actual political or economic leverage to work with. Not that that shouldn't happen at all, but this became by far the strategy around organizing, which was, let's see if we can convince people to, after work or on the weekend or whatever, but extracurricular to whatever they do, come and join this protest and be seen en masse, and which relied a lot upon the media and media portrayal of those events. There's no way to get around relying on that, but this was something that developed. What happens when you do that and you go away from what is the main contradiction in the system, you go away from organizing around that, then class politics becomes less and less clear to the people that we're talking to and to the direction of the campaigns that we involve ourselves in. So you end up having campaigns in which, even when they're successful, people don't necessarily understand the lesson that you're trying to put out there, or the statement you're actually trying to make about the system. It ends up becoming, you know, it ends up becoming a list of grievances as opposed to an analysis of how the system works in a wrong way. Not that the folks organizing it don't have that analysis. It's just that we're picking certain struggles that don't, that aren't able to put that out in a way. And not only are we just picking those struggles, we're not connecting. I mean, those struggles could be chosen, but we're not connecting it to a base of power. So, New Left focusing on students and, you know, and new ways of organizing, a lot of political art that was already definitely part of a movement, but became, at least, you know, as a person living now, I hear a lot more about the political art that came during that time than that came before. So a lot of what happened, it seems, is that the left hid in different places. By hiding, I mean, the left was working in every place except the place where you would think the left needs to work, which is around exploitation, right? And the left hid in art and it hid in academia. Two big hiding places for the left, right? You can keep making songs about the way the world should be different and feel like you're doing a lot because a lot of people in certain cases may be hearing it. We can keep writing papers because students often, you know, if there's no work in organizing the working class and organizing around labor issues, students become professors. And the idea in academia is you have to keep publishing. You can't keep saying the same thing, so you got to develop some new language, right? So whole new lexicons have been developed in the past 30 years that are supposedly describing the same thing, looking for new ways to say the same thing, and then ultimately saying something totally different. Because they're trying to not say that the working class needs to be organized and withhold their labor and eventually make a revolutionary movement that overtakes the ruling class. Why? Because that would be boring to keep writing over and over. It would be, I mean, you know. So you'd end up having to do something. And academia is not currently organized to let that happen. Neither is art. You know, I think all of us could be artists. However, some of us are not lucky enough to be able to have the time to make art. And we have to work. We have to do other things. And the academics, similarly, many, and I'm speaking radical academics, they have to write and read and, you know, and teach and keep doing that. And so it inspires many of us to write and read too, and which is important, but it inspires us to just do what they were doing. You know, our heroes, we have generations now of heroes who weren't organizers. And heroes who we want to emulate, who wrote the greatest chapter that 12 people will read. A lot of people will quote, will talk about what that person wrote, but 12 people will have actually read it. Because it's, you know, written to other academics, right? So, anyway, and artists as well will then write, you know, you have to keep making art that talks about the way the world is, and you're not connected to a movement. You're making art that talks then about just the problems. There's no movement that you're connected to, so there's no hope. So you just keep making really angry shit, like that gets people pumped and angry and hopeless, right? Like at the most what's put, there's no class analysis put in there. If there was class analysis in the art, then there would be some optimism in it. There would be some hope for change. But the way most artists have come in contact with any form of movement, it's been around this jumble of issues that are hard to make sense of, because there's this issue, there's that issue, and there's no clear idea about organizing the working class, who is the basis of the economic power of the ruling class. That's not happening, so that's not being communicated to artists, and artists are emulating their favorite political artists, who also are very confused. And it's not a fault of the artist or the academic, it's a fault of the movement for running away from these issues, which are hard, which are harder to work on, because they, if you're talking about organizing on a job site, you're talking about organizing with people who don't agree with you already. You're talking about you being maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 100, having to be responsible for the political development of all those folks you work with. That's the hard thing. The good thing is that means that your organization then grows in influence by 10 or 100 times, because you have folks that are organizing at their workplace, as opposed to just organizing with each other and seeing if they could maybe on a social level bring 2 new people to the demonstration each, or on a social level bring people out to a demonstration that peripherally they see has to do with it. A lot of the things that we do definitely are part and parcel of organizing under this system, but we have no base in the working class, and part of it is because of the issues that we pick to work on, and part of what working on those particular of working on labor issues can do is bring some power to these other demonstrations. And by labor, I don't mean working in the existing unions. In the US, there's only 7% of the working class that is organized right now. I was just in New Zealand, there's 17% there, and I quickly Googled it here. It's 18%, I believe. So if working with the existing unions is a problem, then you still got 82% of the working class to organize. And when I'm saying a labor movement, I don't mean one like the one that exists right now. I mean a radical, mass, militant labor movement that organizes the sectors of the working class that are unorganized right now. And what that will do is not only give and by radical, what does that mean? Militant, I mean ready to strike. And I mean willing to strike in ways that are illegal, because the only way a union will be able to be effective in these days is to do solidarity strikes. And those are illegal in the US, and I believe they're illegal here. And so it's going to take, someone that is not a career union person, but someone who's a career revolutionary to be interested in organizing that, because you might go to jail. But what will happen if people are going to jail for doing union organizing, as opposed to going to jail in a demonstration, it will start teaching class politics to people. It will be clear that the police that are that are arresting people, or the police that are stopping these strikes or stopping these union organizing, are not just oppressive because they're part of the state. I've heard that line all the time, that we got to bring down the, from, you know, there's a lot of anarchists in the United States, so we got to bring down the power of the state to show people. But that's not the power we need to show people. We need to show people that the state works on behalf of the ruling class, because that's the contradiction that we need to be pointing out. It's not just that, you know, the state is repressive, they block free speech, they tax us too much. It's that the biggest tax on us is the tax that happens when you're working, right? And you know, it's on us. We've left it alone. Think about, so out in the US, out of this history, this recent history of the left, where there's no work, where the radicals are not organizing in the working class for the most part. And again, I'm painting with broad strokes. In the 60s and 70s, there was, as many of you know, the Detroit Revolutionary Union movement. And in a lot of these unions that I talk about, there are some really good radical folks that join them and become union organizers. But as they will tell you, they're swamped because it's not a radical union. And defining I define the militant part that I mean about the union, and that they're ready to strike and ready to do things that are illegal. But the radical part, and this will be the important part, is that these unions would need to be formed with the outward and clear declaration that they are part of building a revolutionary movement. That not only is this fight about wages for right now, which people will or will not get on board for right then, but it's part of a bigger struggle, and that this is connected to these other struggles. And how do we do that? That can be done through statement, but it could also be done through solidarity strikes, through striking about things that the media can't pigeonhole into just being about those workers worrying about their own survival, right? And there's so many, and I'll talk about later, there's so many things that are pointing to that many more people than what we predicted, many more people in the working class are ready for this, right? Are at least much more radical than we think they are, right? And so out of the 60s and 70s, gearing towards academia in the US for radicals, you grew the other side. What do you do when you've got these radical ideas? You maybe even had, you know, a Marxist professor or two, and you got all these ideas, and you see movements happening in different parts of the world. You want to be part of it, but you also want a job because you just spent a lot of time in school. In the US, a lot of what happens is radicals get a job in a nonprofit. And that because it's close to doing what we know is necessary. It's organizing, right? It's organizing. You're in a city often, or you're working with people that need some help of some sort. But there's large parameters put around what you need to do. So, because someone's funding it, and there's parameters about what can be said and what campaigns can be gotten into. So, for instance, now we have radicals very involved in organizations that are trying to stop the violence. Stop the violence meaning not the violence going on in Afghanistan, but stop the violence that's happening in the streets, the violence that happens among the working class. So they say stop the violence. And then what are the programs? I can agree with that. We need to stop that violence. What are the programs that are usually put forward by these nonprofits? Some of them staffed with radicals that are versed in some sort of class analysis. Are they putting forward a class line? Well, what they offer up often is we should teach people how to speak to each other nicer. We should have meetings with people and have kids play chess, because they play chess or they have a place to play basketball, which both are things that I think we should all be able to play chess and play basketball and watch movies and all of those things. I think that's part of life. But the idea is that if you do that, then they'll stop being violent. Why would that stop them from being violent? Why? Because the thing that's being put out by many of these organizations is that the violence is an outgrowth of an inferior moral code. The violence is an outgrowth of bad parenting. There's not a father in the house. The violence is an outgrowth of people being too macho, right? And there's whole theories that are put forward about this to back it up, because now you've got a job in it. You better like make a good argument for it. And it confuses a lot of people. However, a class line about it will tell you that capitalism must have unemployment in order to work. If there was full unemployment under capitalism, then workers could demand whatever wage they wanted without even going on strike. Because the boss couldn't say, you're fired, I'm going to replace you. There's nobody to replace you. It's full employment. So so unemployment is necessary to keep wages low. Wall Street Journal, all those financial newspapers will start worrying out loud when unemployment starts going down low. So what happens when you're unemployed? Most likely unemployed people want to eat too. So they're going to figure out a way to eat. And that means, in the United States, that means illegal business. And as we know, all business regulates itself. How does it regulate itself? All business regulates itself through violence. If it's legal business, it regulates itself through violence. That violent force is called the police. You can't walk out of a grocery store pushing a cart of groceries and not paying, because you're going to be met with that violent force. Now, maybe that violent force will meet you and they won't beat you down. Depending on what you look like, what their mood is, what they ate for breakfast, you may not get roughed up. But at the very least, even if they kiss you on the forehead, they're either taking you to jail, they're going to take you to jail, but they're definitely bringing those groceries back to the store. So that's the violent force that's needed for businesses to exist, right? That's the violent force that's necessary. Now, illegal business, they don't have it so easy. How do they regulate themselves? They do it themselves, right? Because they can't go to court and say, Your Honor, I bought a whole key of cocaine from him, and clearly it was mixed with 85% baking soda. I demand restitution. You can't do that. You can't go to the zoning commission and say, we got to change these permits because this place should be zoned just for 2 dope dealers on this corner, and clearly 5 is too many, and I'd like to see what I can do about that. It's regulated through violence. It's regulated through violence, and you know, whatever we do to survive creates culture. You know, if you have a fishing village, there's going to be a bunch of fishing songs. Right? And you know, however, you know, nonprofits and cultural pundits will tell you that maybe if you went to a fishing village and made songs about planting seeds, that maybe it would change from a fishing village to an agricultural community. But no, fishing villages create fishing songs, not the other way around. So a culture is developed out of what we do to survive. And you know what? Revolutionaries know this. It's just not in fashion to say it. And it's terrible because it's a really easy thing to talk about. Like, people will, there's so many interviews where, you know, public leaders are like, what are we going to do about the violence in our communities? And if I'm ever there, I say, hey, how about we support organizing the fast food workers and getting $16 an hour? And like, you know, then there's silence. Like, but that doesn't mean funding the police, right? So all of these, you know, we've had a number of ex-revolutionaries in Oakland that are in the city council or mayor. We had, you know, one of the first people that declared themselves a socialist in Congress, Ron Dellums, whose grandfather was one of the organizers of the first black union in the United States, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Ron Dellums declared himself a socialist. He came back and was the mayor of Oakland, and that was his answer too. It was more police, but maybe more polite police. Right? So we get into these crazy, you know, sidetrack arguments based on our unwillingness to work around organizing labor in a radical way, right? A lot of the answers, even beyond making a revolution, just changing things a little bit, come with having that part organized. You know, I talk about the $16 an hour for fast food workers. Anybody that I know that has sold dope clearly makes less than $12 an hour and would gladly take a job that paid that much instead of doing that, right? So these are short-term, but even the organizing for that isn't a long-term solution to that, because as we know, everybody can't be employed, right? We know what the long-term solution is, and that's why we're here. However, to the extent that we need to organize reforms in order to build a revolutionary movement, these are the reform struggles that we're hiding away from, and we're always looking at what we could do that would make things better. I mean, imagine if the campaign to get rid of a racist cop could call on the local industry to shut down until that cop was fired. It'd be much better than having people picketing around in a circle in front of the police station. Because what happens is the community says, that's never going to work. And unfortunately, they're right. Like, I've been involved in many police brutality campaigns. And unless we have a base of power to shut things down, what's going to happen is what's happened in every one of them that I've been in. Even when there's video of a cop having someone laid on the ground and shooting them in the back. That's the worst that happened, and because it was on video and all over YouTube, the cop got 10 months in jail, and that was it, right? And that's the most success we've ever had. All the other ones, the cop gets fired, quote unquote, but what that means is moved to another precinct, another city, and where he gets pats on the back because he's, in their eyes, a badass, and he gets a raise, right? That cop that got 10 months in jail is suing to get his back pay now, and probably will get it, right? So the point is this, is that we spend a lot of time, and it's different when the community is activated around it, then we need to go and we need to support that community. But often, we're creating these campaigns, we're sparking off these campaigns and spending a lot of energy, and that's not where everybody's at. So where is everybody at? Obviously, we know everybody is at the place of trying to figure out how to pay the rent, trying to figure out how to put food on the table. One way we can know this is just by talking to people. The other way we can know this is through popular culture. A lot of people complain you know, especially folks on the left. And maybe, and I know why. I see why a lot of people complain about the songs that people listen to in hip hop. Jay-Z raps about having all this money, Kanye. And there's a big question there. Why do people that can barely pay their rent want to listen to this stuff? Do they think that they might have this stuff at some point? Sometimes. But what they really are thinking is, that sounds like freedom to me. That's somebody that doesn't have to pay that doesn't have to worry about paying rent, doesn't have to worry about being evicted, doesn't have to worry about, you know, where their kids are gonna sleep, doesn't have to worry about whether they got to do something that might land them in jail, right? Whether they got to do something to survive them. So that's, for a lot of people, the only image of freedom that they're seeing. Why? Because radicals are nowhere around. Radicals aren't involved in the things that they're dealing with. And radicals aren't making it clear that what we're talking about is redistributing that wealth. And we're not only talking about redistributing all the wealth later on, you know, decades from now when the revolution happens. We're talking about methods of collectively redistributing some of that wealth right now. And what would that mean? That would mean radical mass militant unions. Right? We're not working there. We're not dealing with things that everybody wants to deal with. Right? We're not dealing with those things. And we got chased out of that arena. But that arena is very small for the liberal progressives. We're leaving a lot of the folks behind. But again, what would happen if we did keep organizing around the sort of campaigns that we're talking about, and at the same time, we're organizing labor in a radical way. About last year, there was a climate change meeting in London. And they were talking about ways to negotiate with corporations on their emissions and things like that. And 3 scientists left the meeting and had a press conference outside and said, you know what? Only thing that's going to save us is if we shut everything down right now and the people take over. Well, of course, it was theoretical because radicals don't have a base in labor. Can't do it. Can't pull it off. Can't pull off a semblance of it right now. Radical things do happen in the labor movement because often the base of what is in the labor movement right now is more radical than the leadership. So that's happening, and there are radicals that are organizing in that labor movement, and you know, but it's very few. And you know, so we need a base to those things that we're doing, and we've gotten stuck in our ways of how we organize. So one illustration of this is when Occupy came along. Occupy came along, and I went and visited. I was on tour in New York, and I went and visited like within like the second week of it, like as it was just starting to get some publicity. I went and visited the one in New York, and I was like, what the fuck is this? It's a bunch of hippies. They're saying they don't know what to do, or they don't know how to make it happen. They don't know what the problem is, and they don't know what the answer is. And there was a meeting where everyone was doing the mic check back and forth, which seemed pretentious to me. I was like, what the fuck is this? And they took 2 hours to figure out what to do with $700. And I was just like, it's not gonna work. It's not. It didn't look like what I had read about what a mass movement should look like, right? It didn't look like any of the things that we had tried to start in the, 15 or 20 years I've been involved before. It didn't look like, they weren't playing by the numbers. I have a lot of critiques of the anarchist movement, but what they do bring is this idea of just trying something, even though sometimes it might not seem like it could work. Anyway, it didn't seem like it could work, and I got in, and I had a friend that kept inviting, when I got back to Oakland, kept inviting me to go drink, and every time we would go drink, he'd say, but we gotta make a detour, it's a shortcut to, and I'd be like, that's not a shortcut because we gotta go through Occupy Oakland encampment. Why am I gonna do that? And so I kind of got tricked to keep going back there, and I met folks and got involved once they were starting to get kicked out the first time. Anyway, through being involved in it, I realized it was different. What was happening different there than was happening in other encampments around the country was that radicals didn't do what I did, which was say, oh, this is not right. Radicals said, hey, we're gonna get involved in this, and we're gonna make these radical politics known based on working from the ideas that are already here. And that's one of the reasons why Occupy Oakland was so different than every place else, because it was the place that radicals didn't ignore it. For the most part, in a lot of the country, the radicals in that area could give me a list of reasons that they didn't want to be involved with it. Anyway, and that sort of thinking ended up coming about to Oakland as well. But so when Occupy Oakland started saying, well, we're going to use a strategy of withholding labor to make statements and to gain some victories, we were immediately, or pretty immediately, confronted by some organizations that had been working in, okay. If I want time for a Q&A, I'll have to wind up my talk soon. Okay, so a lot of organizations said, you know, again, you're not doing it right. In one particular case, it was saying, well, you're not really speaking to the issues of people of color. Now, I've been involved in a lot of organizations in the Bay Area. My first involvement in radical politics was in a multiracial organization, Progressive Labor Party, that was very sectarian, and that's probably why nobody knows about them. And but then I later on was involved in radical organizations that were focused more on people of color, and one of them was an all-black organization with just the strategic idea of organizing in the black community, with some class analysis involved in it. And that was called the Young Comrades. And anyway, and I've seen other organizations that were all black organizations or all people of color organizations, and so many various things of it. Occupy Oakland had more black folks involved in it than any of those organizations had put together. And the reason is because when we would go organize before this, throughout the 90s, let's say, and say that we wanted to organize around a police brutality case or organize around, you know, a housing thing or whatever, a lot of the reaction, even though it was supportive, was kind of like, yeah, well, but that can't win, you know. What are you going to do? You're not going to, you don't have enough people, not enough people are going to join. What's the strategy? Why would what you're doing change anything? And in reality, we didn't really have a strategy. There is no real strategy right now for fighting police brutality. I haven't seen one, I may be wrong, but there's no, you know, nobody has a 1, 2, 3 step for that. And housing changes each time, and it really is depending on how many people you already have involved with you in which you can do something about it. With Occupy Oakland, people saw that there was some element of using power to leverage change with the general strike. People saw the general strike. We announced the general strike, and we did it at, obviously, without going through the history, we did it at a time when the world, many of the world's media was watching us. And we announced it, so people saw that, they saw the possibility of winning, and they saw that we're talking about what they're worried about, which is economics, which is microeconomics, getting paid, but in a collective way. And so people came around. Trying to make a strike at a place of work, or trying to get this place to strike, and so that's one basis, at the very least, one basis, one solid material basis for solidarity. Another example of that is that you know, when we talk about fighting racism and multiracial unity around things, the best examples of that have been in labor struggles. With the farm workers, I was working around farm workers with the radical offshoot of the UFW, people that had been kicked out of the UFW for being communists. They organized an anti-racist farm workers union, and in the community there was big separation between Filipino workers and Mexican workers. And they had been known at various times to scab on each other. And a lot of this was backed up with various myths and caricatures of the other community. And the thing that brought folks together was organizing for a big strike. And it didn't mean that it stopped the racism, but it meant there was a way of critiquing each other's interaction that was building instead of destroying, instead of purging. And when you have a spectacle-based thing, it's more likely that your critique is gonna lean towards purging the person that doesn't, or the people that don't fall in line with you. Anyway, I'm gonna go to question and answer. Sorry I've been so long-winded, but you know, basically, I think that if we're going to build this revolutionary movement, we got to take it seriously, because there's so many signs that the working class wants more than what we're giving them. You know, the other side of the Fox News thing is that when Occupy started, shortly into it, Fox News did a poll of their viewers, and their viewers are probably and reportedly considered the right-wing segment of the country. They put a poll question out on the air where they said, we want to know if the Occupy movement's theme of the 1% versus the 99% speaks to you. 85% of Fox viewers said yes. So we have certain misnomers about different cultural communities that led to, in the Occupy movement, if someone was dressed a certain way, they were probably a cop, they got ignored, they got pushed out, even if they kept trying to come in, because they didn't dress like a radical, they didn't have the right lingo or whatever, and that happened in a lot of places. But what we got to see is a lot of what we think of, because of what developed after that New Left period, a lot of what we think of as what's left is not really left. Going back to the gun thing, right now, a lot of the progressive left is hyped up on gun control. And the reality is it comes again from that same question. People are killing each other in cities. Why does it come from? It must just be the gun. It can't have to do with the situation that they're in the first place, right? The idea that it's the gun, sorry, doesn't fit in line with any other class analysis in history that we've had. Now, but what it does fit in line with is a certain cultural elitism that is connected to the left wanting to connect itself to electoral politics in the Democratic Party, which was much more about Northern culture versus Southern culture. And the laws, again, that they're proposing don't affect white Southerners. It's black people in the city that get arrested for it, right? On the other hand, the culture that it developed from was that culture in which people were saying, look, these company owners keep sending armed security to fight us, we're going to arm ourselves, right? Now, the lingo about it has changed as it's gone on to be less class conscious because radicals haven't been there. The lingo about it is that it's about the government, them against the government, as opposed to them against the ruling class. But the left has aligned itself based on cultural codes as opposed to based on the idea of organizing the working class. And those things will change once we get a base in organizing around labor and organizing our own new mass militant radical unions.